welcome to Allie's Annotation. My name is Allie. Now let's talk about some books. Specifically, these October reads, because today is our October reading recap. It was a fruitful month of reading. My average rating was a little bit lower than usual, but it was, I cruised through so many books that were on my physical TBR. I will admit, all but 3 of them I did read via audiobook, but I have the physical copies, so they still get to get off of my physical TBR, which is great. To start off with some stats, I read 18 books in the month of October and 1 DNF, which we'll talk about first so that we don't end on like a bummer. But I read 5,501 pages and had a 3.75 average star rating. I'm going to say that this 18 books comes with like a little grain of salt because I did finish the Bridgerton series and some of them count for more. I'll talk about that later. But it was a pretty decent reading month. And let's go ahead and we will go through the books that I read, the ratings that I gave them, and we'll talk a little bit about what I enjoyed, what I didn't. As always, the reviews for these books, if you want to read them in full, are going to be on my StoryGraph. I do also cross-post them to Goodreads and Amazon. And if you have any questions, please drop them below. I would love to know what you've thought about these books, or if you hated them, I'd love to know that too. Go ahead and let me know. Let's talk about my DNF first because I am devastated about this. This is Tideborn by Eliza Chan. It is the sequel to Fathom Folk, and this is one that I originally read Fathom Folk a year and a half, 2 years ago, and really, really enjoyed it. I will absolutely recommend that to anybody. I hate DNFing books. I very rarely do it, and I will always soft DNF first, but this is now a hard DNF for me. I tried reading this, I think back in February, got up to about 24%. Didn't pick it up again, and this time I DNF'd at about 43%. I'm going to start by saying that the world Chan has built with this duology is amazing. I am still thinking about the first book in this duology 2 years later, and the world is just so unique. It's deeply allegorical. She's got this ensemble of characters that she balances so well. Their storylines interweave together, and I love that. Even in this book, the characters' emotional journeys, I only got to 43% of the book. I cried multiple times. The emotional impact of the stories is there. The character work is fantastic. With that said, I was reading this on my digital ebook and on audiobook, and I just found that things were moving really, really slowly for me. I would put the book down in between reading sessions and have no desire to pick it back up. And I kind of had to force myself to when I did. Normally, in a fantasy story that is deeply allegorical, what'll happen is the action scenes in the plot will be distinct and happen often enough to really push and drive that plot along. And then the themes of allegorical nuance will be subtle threads that are woven through those different pieces of action. This book was the exact opposite. The core themes and metaphor will smack you upside the head, and then you're left feeling like, okay, have we done anything yet? Because the action, I'm missing the stuff happening. I'm missing those big moments that help me understand where the plot is going and how it's moving forward. I wanted to love this so bad. Unfortunately for me, it just didn't hit. But I will still recommend the first book, Fathom Folk, to literally anyone. And Fathom Folk does have a plot that wraps up nicely. So you won't be left with like a huge cliffhanger at the end of it. So still go read the first book. And I do recommend that you try the second one. Even if it didn't work for me, it might work for you. How I kicked off October with To Clutch a Razor by Veronica Roth. I rated this at 4.5 stars and read it as an audiobook ALC, which is an advanced listening copy. Veronica Roth is one of the authors who, if I met in person, I think I would be speechless, which people in my life can confirm that that's a really rare event for me. This is the sequel to Veronica Roth's urban folklore fantasy novella duology. So it's a very short book. It is urban folklore fantasy, specifically Polish folklore, and I loved it. This is based in Polish folklore around this idea of monster hunters, and the themes are really around like what it means to be a monster. Because there's different definitions of that. There are actual like creatures that are considered monsters in Polish folklore. But then what does it mean to be a monster like in your heart too? That's kind of what the first book in this duology explored. And then the second book, this one, really talked a lot about found family versus the blood family, the family you're related to, and the struggle and grief and joy to be found within that dichotomy. And I don't even know what to say. This was so good. This book and the first one in the duology, When Among Crows, are short, easy to read. Highly recommend if you are into fantasy of any kind. Love it. Next up, I read Thief of Night by Holly Black. I'm also a Holly Black fangirl. Y'all know. Thief of Night I got as an audiobook ALC, and then I had to buy a physical copy, and I bought it, and then found out it's freaking signed. Okay. And I rated this at a 4.25 stars. This is the sequel to Holly Black's first adult book, which is called Book of Night. It's the Charlatan duology, so this is the second and last book in the little series. And while this started off a little bit slow, I love. It has a lot of like darker themes, and then it continues Holly Black's ties to like traditional fantasy or fae folklore. She weaves that into a lot of her stories, and her character work. The character work in this is excellent. I'm a huge fan of it. Her characters are really gray and complex, and you feel intense attachment to them even when they maybe aren't great people and you don't agree with them. I think that's such a cool thing to do with characters. I really like that. There are a lot of themes around grief and struggle and trauma and feelings of self-worth in this one, which is really nice. And I had a good time reading this. It's also really not too long. It's a very doable read, I think. I did really love this quote from it. Red was a monster. You didn't grow old with a monster. You set the world on fire together and burned up in the blaze. I love it. Next up is Looking for Group by Alexis Hall. This is a re-release. I think the book was originally published in 2016, but in 2025, Sourcebooks Casablanca acquired it, and they did a re-release, new cover, a couple of updates, and it's that one of those like matte feely ones. I love that. This was a 3.75 for me. It is an MMORPG based book with a lot of the content happening inside a very World of Warcraft type game in like a multimedia setting. What I mean by that is that a lot of the passages are in like the chat in the game. So it was a really cool kind of multimedia experience. And ultimately, this is a queer awakening story between our main character who meets someone in their game who presents as female in the game, but is actually played by a male identifying character. And I thought that this was done in a really unique way. I think there are other stories that are kind of afraid to explore the messiness around figuring out if you're queer. I think a lot of people, especially with more conservative upbringings, feel a lot of shame around their queerness. And so I really liked the way this was handled. It felt very real, and the main character really has to work through their changing feelings around their sexual identity and orientation. So it was really enjoyable for me. And another note is that this book used to have a reference to JKR's IP Harry Potter, and it was removed for this book. And throughout the book, there are little sword icons in there. Let's see if that wants to focus. Little sword icons, and each one of those icons corresponds to an annotation from the author. So there are footnotes throughout the entire book. It's why it's such a thick book. A lot of these are like this whole chunk here is all annotations at the back. But it was a really cool way to engage with the book, which I liked. Next, we have Zomromcom by Olivia Dade. If you know me, you know that I have struggled with Olivia Dade in the past. I read one of her books, and I did not have a good time. This I rated 4 stars, so this has brought me back to neutral on Olivia Dade. This was good enough to bring me back to my starting point, so I think I will probably try another one of her books to see if it's as good as this one. It's possible that the first book I read was maybe one of the first ones she wrote. I don't know, but I did like this. This was good. In this world, some 20 years ago, somebody accidentally made zombies, and they were contained in this like containment zone 0. The government has built concentric circles of walls around this containment zone, and you can live closer to the zone for basically cheaper housing. Our main character, Edie, her parents actually had a house in zone 1 that she lives in. Her parents are no longer with us. And the book starts with an outbreak into zone 1. And in this outbreak, Edie is struck by heroism and wants to try and save her neighbor because he's unaware that a zombie is running toward him. And turns out he doesn't need help because he's a vampire. He's a hot vampire. And he is pissed that she would abandon her own safety to try and save him. And, you know, it's a romance and they are fighting zombies and it is fun and silly. And while I think the world building was lacking, like there were a lot of things in the world building that I was like, I need more information. But it was made up for with character work and some sillies, and there were some really good, genuine, heartfelt moments. I also like that the plus size representation for this Olivia Dade book was, I think, valid. It didn't feel like she hated herself, which I liked. She just was very happy with who she is, and her size was not a plot point. So I liked that. I kind of wished that the vampire was plus size too. Next up is The Second Death of Locke by V.L. Bovalino, or Tori Bovalino. And I rated this at a 4.25 stars. I thought this was really cool. I got an advance finished copy. Thank you to Forever for sending that to me. And the magic in this world is just so cool. It is also romantic with a twist on like the traditional cadence of a romance, which I really liked. So in this story, our main character, Gray, is what's called a well, meaning that she is partnered with a mage named Kier, and she is the source of the power for the magic that he wields. So in this magic system, you have people who can perform magic but don't have any power to do so, and people who have power and need to give it to someone else to wield. So there's overall this ongoing theme of the idea of giving and taking, and how do you find your self-worth in that kind of not power struggle, but power partnership. And Gray and Kier have been together for some 16 years, and she loves him and has not told him. And these two are sent on a quest that will put them into dangerous territory in this ongoing war that has been fought for years and years over the waning power in the land. The power that people are being born with is less and less and less, and this quest is threatening to let out a secret that they're keeping. That Gray isn't who people think she is, and that if she dies, all the power in the land will die too. It's really cool. It's also relatively long. It's almost 500 pages, and there were a couple of parts that had some pacing issues just because it's so long, but I just freaking loved the characters. There are also several parts that made me cry, and I read this on an airplane, so really cute. Sobbing in my hoodie, just like trying to keep it contained. This is one of the quotes that the author actually posted on their Instagram before the book launched that got me. She wanted to run her hands over that careful work, mess him up. She wanted to ruin him. I think this really sums up one of the core themes, which is when one character says to another, "You matter more than your power. I beg you to keep that in mind. Why must you always sacrifice yourself and call that love?" Anyway, I definitely recommend. Next up, I read Sunny Side Up by Katie Sturino. I rated this at a 3.25 stars. I had a digital book and I also read it on audiobook. And in case you don't know, Katie Sturino has been like a fashion blogger since before Instagram and a champion for mid and plus size fashion for a lot of her career. I used to follow her. I think I'm probably questionable maybe in some of her politics. I haven't followed her in years, so I don't know. But the same reason that I had some issues with this book is the same reason that I stopped investing in her content originally. But in this story, Sunny is a mid-sized woman, like size 14 in New York City, struggling with her body. And she's getting out of a relationship that has made her feel diminished, which I think is very relatable to a lot of people. I personally didn't find it super relatable, but that's because I was not in the headspace that this book was written for. So I think if folks are struggling with body image, especially if you are finding yourself moving from what are considered straight sizes into mid or plus sizes, I think you probably will relate to this quite a bit. Sunny is really like starting a new chapter for herself, and I loved the audiobook narrator. I think that the narrator did a really great job embodying the feeling of the character really nicely. And I also really liked the language used to talk about a relationship with your body. I think this book pushes for something that I personally advocate, which is body neutrality and body relationships, which is you and your body need to figure out what works for you, and you need to not be negative about your body. I don't think you need to be like positive at all costs about your body. So I liked that language that was used. And what I struggled with first was, I think, heavy-handedness on the themes. In terms of that body neutrality message, boy, oh boy, they were like, hey, don't hate yourself. And that's fine, but it felt like that was repeated over and over again, and I didn't need that. The second thing is that the main character, Sunny, is very privileged, and I did not see any acknowledgement of that. She is affluent enough to be shopping at name brand designer stores in Manhattan, and that's not relatable at all. Especially when we're talking about mid and plus size fashion, when plus size fashion is not accessible and not affordable. I think that needs to be said, especially in a book published this year. Next up, we've got 10 books, because I read Bridgerton's 4 through 8, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Each book in the Bridgerton series does have what's called a second epilogue that was published separately from the main books. And so for that reason, they count on StoryGraph as 2 books each. So just know that that's where some of those numbers come from. I'm going to run through each story real quick with a rating and what I thought about it. First up is Romancing Mr. Bridgerton, which is book 4, and this is Penelope and Colin's story. This one I rated out of 4 stars. I'm biased because I really liked this Netflix season, but this had very good yearning and was so funny. I think that this is better than the Netflix season because in the season, Colin's abrupt, about face to like, I don't know who she is, to I love her, seemed out of the blue, no development, and I got that development that I needed within the story here. Also, each of these books has 2 stories within it, so each of these are actually 2 of the books. But next up is To Sir Phillip with Love, which is Eloise and Philip's story. This, I think, was the best one of the series for me. This was a 4.25 stars. Funny as hell, and Book Eloise can get it. I really like Book Eloise. This quote took me all the way out. As long as she lived, she'd never understand men. She had 4 brothers and quite frankly should have understood them better than most women. And maybe it had taken all of her 28 years to come to this realization, but men were, quite simply, freaks. Amazing. 10 out of 10. Love that. So, I really liked Eloise's story, and Netflix is not going to do her justice at all. In the same physical volume here, we have When He Was Wicked, which is Francesca and Michael's story. This one, I was not a fan of as much. No, this was a 3.25 stars because this man is demanding, and I do not care for the way that he talked about Francesca, to be quite honest. It's like the she's mine, but in a bad way. You know what I mean? The thing is that Julia Quinn's writing is funny. It has so much levity to it. I do really, really like the writing, and I like all the rest of the characters. Francesca, for me, was not my favorite, but I really didn't like Michael. Next up is book 7, It's in His Kiss, which stars Hyacinth and Gareth. This one was a 3.75 stars. It was it was fine. I will say book Hyacinth is like the exact same as Netflix Hyacinth. Boy, oh boy, did they cast her really, really well. This was good. I just don't love Hyacinth as much as I liked Eloise, and I think this one was a little bit more forgettable, so it was fine. It was still really good, and I did enjoy it. The last one, book 8, On the Way to the Wedding, is Gregory and Lucy's story, and this one was a 3.25 stars because I get that this is historical romance. I fully understand that we want this to be period accurate to like gender roles, whatever. But we proved earlier in the series that a man can worship his wife. So where's that? Where's that? I don't like the way that Gregory talked about any of the women in the entire book. So, not a huge fan of Gregory's story, but again, the writing's fantastic, and I liked all of the other characters, every single one of them, except for the main one. Second to last, we have That Time I Got Drunk and Saved a Demon by Kimberly Lemming. This one was a 3.5 stars for me. I read it on audiobook from Libby, and I think that I would have enjoyed this more reading with my eyeballs instead of my earballs, because for me, the narrator's Southern accent took me out of the setting. I couldn't quite tell if the narrator actually had a Southern accent. It felt a little bit forced to me, so maybe it was exaggerated if she does have a Southern accent naturally. But I think that was something that I really struggled with in the audiobook version of this, and I think it would have been different if I'd been reading. So this is a very like funsies fantasy romance and delivers all of the snark and sass and sarcasm that you would expect from that type of story. And so you did have, oh my gosh, the main character for this, she knows what she wants. She's getting it. And I loved that the main character was so very herself. She was so self-assured. Even when she felt self-conscious about something, she still was never in doubt about herself and her worth, and I loved that. I especially loved how in this story, the main character is confronted about the idea that her goddess and her faith is harming people. And she does not take a second to waffle. She immediately goes, well, hell no, that's not acceptable to me. And that is so needed in this space, in all the spaces. I loved that. I think that some of like the action and plot didn't add up super well to me, but that also could have been the audiobook taking me out of it. So grain of salt there. I still enjoyed this and would recommend it. Last up is Lore of the Tides by Analeigh Sbrana. I did get a digital arc of this and I read it via audiobook as well. So I did a double read and I had a physical copy on pre-order anyway. So this one for me ended up being a 3 stars. I wanted to love this bad. I wanted this to be one of the best books of the year for me. Ultimately, this book has 1,836 different plot points and action scenes. Like, I finished this less than a week ago, and I could not tell you every incident that occurred on the plot timeline because my memory isn't that good. And it was less than a week ago. There was just too much going on, so the pacing felt like we were at a breakneck speed. I think because of that, the character development also felt kind of whiplashy because we didn't get, it's not super long, but we didn't get a ton of time to sit with characters and how they developed and get those in-between scenes. It was action to action to action to action. It was a lot of, in terms of character development, a lot of telling with very little showing, which I struggled with big time. Things that I did really like. I really loved the theme of resilience, specifically within the main character lore. That was really moving for me, and how she is always going to stand up for what she believes in. And I also thought, like, I'm not going to give anything away, but there's a specific point in the book where her resilience just shines through, and I really enjoyed that theme line for me. I also really like the world that Sbrana has created here. And in the first book, I fell in love with these characters. I think Sbrana's voice has a place in romantasy that's really needed. And for me, it was just that the second book fell short of the things that I really loved in the first book, unfortunately. So there we go, my October reads. Again, it was a very fruitful month. I am getting so many big old books off of my physical TBR, and I am diving into NetGalley November, so I would love, love, love to see you over on our reading sprints. I would love to see you in the Discord. I also have my own Discord now because I am going to be running a fantasy traveling book club for 2026. If you'd like to join, I have a link to the Annotation Station Discord down in the description below. Come join us. We'd love to have you. And if you have any questions, if you want to talk to me about these books, please do in the comments below. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe so that you'll get notified for more. And now I will see you in November.